My daughter said I'm the reason her dad left, so I left her too. I was making coffee after a double shift when my 14-year-old Ariana walked into the kitchen dressed for a party I'd never approved. I'm going to Mia's house. Her mom said I could sleep over. It's a school night. You have a test tomorrow. Her face twisted into something I barely recognized. Mia's mom trusts her. You're so controlling. No wonder Dad couldn't stand living here. I set down my coffee. Ariana, it's true. She stepped closer, tears building in her eyes. You drove him away. Everyone knows it. I heard Mia's mom say it. You're impossible to live with. I should have stayed calm. I should have explained. Instead, I was exhausted and hurt, and I said the worst thing I could have said. Fine. You want me gone? I'll give you some space. I grabbed my keys and drove to my sister's house. I told myself I'd go back in the morning, that I just needed one night to clear my head. But Ariana didn't call, didn't text, nothing. So I waited. She didn't know what I'd protected her from. The savings account her father emptied before he left. The nights I'd worked double shifts to keep us in our house. The truth about why he really disappeared, which had nothing to do with me being impossible, and everything to do with him finding someone younger in another state. I'd let her believe a softer story. That her dad just needed space. That sometimes people grow apart. I thought I was protecting her. Maybe I was just protecting myself from having that conversation. By day 3, her Instagram told the whole story. Photos at parties, comments about how free she felt. A boy I didn't recognize with his arm around her shoulder. By day 5, the text started. Where's the permission slip for the field trip? Do we have laundry detergent? The school called about my test. Can you call them back? I responded to each one the same way. You can handle it. Day 7 broke her. She called me crying at 11 p.m. The party she'd gone to had gotten out of control. Some older kids showed up. Things got scary. She'd locked herself in a bathroom. Mom, please come get me. I'm sorry. Please. Every instinct told me to run to my car. But I made myself ask the question. Did you try calling your dad? Silence. Then quietly. I found his number online. He has a new family now, a little boy. He posted photos from Disneyland last week. She'd never told me she'd looked him up. Did you call him? He didn't answer. I texted and he just said, her voice cracked. He said I should ask my mother, that he signed away his rights for a reason. I was already grabbing my keys. I found her sitting on the curb outside a house I didn't recognize. Mascara streaked down her face. She climbed into the car without saying anything. We drove home in silence. When we got inside, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at her hands. I didn't know he signed away his rights. I never told you. Why? I sat down across from her. Because you were 10. Because I wanted you to believe your father loved you, even if he couldn't show it. Because I thought the truth would hurt more than the lie. She looked up at me. You let me blame you. For years. You let me think you were the problem. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From knowing my dad didn't want me? She started crying again. I already knew, Mom. I just didn't want to believe it. It was easier to be mad at you. I reached across the table and took her hands. I'm sorry I left this week. That wasn't fair. I was hurt, and I handled it wrong. I'm sorry I said you were the reason he left. She squeezed my fingers. You're not. You're the reason I'm okay. You're the reason we still have a house and I have clothes and someone shows up to my volleyball games. I'll always show up. I know. She wiped her eyes. I think I always knew. I just didn't want to admit that the parent who stayed was the one who actually loved me. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just holding hands across the table. She's 16 now, still pushes boundaries, still rolls her eyes when I enforce curfew. We fight about clothes and boys and screen time like every other mother and daughter. But she's never blamed me for her father again. And whenever she leaves the house, no matter how annoyed she is with me, she always says the same thing. Love you, Mom. 3 words. That's all I ever needed. Not an apology, not perfection. Just the knowledge that when she walks out the door, she knows exactly who will be there when she comes back. Her dad gave her life. But I gave her a home. And she finally understands the difference. The morning after we talked, I woke up to sounds coming from the kitchen. I walked in and found Ariana standing at the stove making scrambled eggs. She had toast in the toaster and my favorite coffee mug sitting on the counter. She didn't look at me when I came in, just kept stirring the eggs in the pan. When they were done, she put some on a plate with 2 pieces of toast and slid it across the table to me. She gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but told me everything I needed to know. We were going to be okay. Over the next few days, things started to feel different between us. She asked me questions she'd never asked before. Real questions about things I'd been hiding from her for years. One night, she sat down at the kitchen table while I was paying bills and asked about the savings account her father emptied. I stopped writing and looked at her. She deserved the truth. I told her about the $15,000 he took before he left, how I'd been saving it for her college fund and our emergency money, how he cleaned it out 3 days before he disappeared, and I had to start over from nothing. I told her about the extra shifts I picked up, the overtime I volunteered for, the times I skipped meals so she could have new volleyball shoes. She sat there listening with tears running down her face. She didn't interrupt or ask questions. She just listened while I explained how I rebuilt everything he destroyed. A few days later, she asked about the divorce. Not the easy version I'd been telling her for years, but the real story. I sat down with her and explained how her father met someone online, how he spent months talking to this other woman while I was working double shifts, how he made promises to her and planned his whole exit without telling me anything. When Ariana was 10, he just left. Packed a bag while she was at the school and drove to another state. No warning, no conversation, just gone. Ariana cried when I told her. She said she'd always wondered why he never called or visited, why he forgot her birthday every year. Now she knew it wasn't because of something she did wrong. It was because he chose to walk away. 2 weeks after the party, my phone rang while I was at work. It was Ariana's school counselor calling about her missed test and the absences from the week I'd been gone. I explained that we'd had a family crisis without giving details. The counselor was understanding. She said Ariana could make up the test and offered to meet with her twice a week to help her catch up. She also suggested regular check-ins to make sure Ariana was doing okay emotionally. I agreed to everything. Ariana started meeting with the counselor every Tuesday and Thursday after school. She'd come home and tell me about their conversations, how the counselor helped her understand her feelings about her father, how she was learning to process her anger without taking it out on me. I was grateful for those sessions. They gave Ariana a safe place to work through everything without our relationship becoming the punching bag again. One Saturday morning, I pulled out our household budget and asked Ariana to sit with me. I showed her everything: the rent payment, the utility bills, the grocery costs, her volleyball fees and equipment. She stared at the numbers with her mouth open. She had no idea how much everything cost. No idea why I worked so many double shifts just to keep us in our house with food in the fridge. When I finished explaining, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she wanted to get a part-time job to help. I told her no. School and volleyball were her job right now. Her grades and her future were what mattered. But the fact that she offered showed me how much she'd grown up in just a few weeks. The boy from the party started texting Ariana constantly. She showed me the messages one night, her face tight with worry. He kept asking her to hang out, kept saying he wanted to see her again. She told me he'd made her uncomfortable that night, that something about him felt wrong. I watched her block his number right there in front of me. I was proud of her for trusting her instincts, for not ignoring that feeling in her gut just because some boy was giving her attention. I ran into Mia's mother at the grocery store the next week. She cornered me in the produce section with this fake concerned look on her face. She asked how Ariana was doing after her wild phase, said she'd heard about the parties and the missed school. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I told her politely but firmly that my daughter and our family were none of her business. I walked away feeling stronger than I had in months. That night, Ariana asked if she could stop being friends with Mia. She said Mia's influence had been mostly negative, that Mia encouraged her to sneak out and lie to me, that she wanted friends who made better choices. I told her that was her decision to make, that I'd support whatever felt right for her friendships. She seemed relieved, like she'd been waiting for permission to let go of something that wasn't good for her anymore. Ariana's next volleyball game happened on a Tuesday evening in the school gym. I got there early and found a seat in the bleachers near the back. The team warmed up on the court and I spotted Ariana right away in her number 7 jersey. She moved differently than she had at previous games. Her movements looked sharper, more focused. She wasn't looking around at the crowd or checking her phone between drills. She was just playing. The game started and I watched her serve, set, and dive for balls with this energy I hadn't seen in months. She smiled at her teammates. She called out plays. She looked like she was actually enjoying herself instead of going through the motions. Her team won the first set, then the second. After the game ended, the coach walked over to me while the girls were packing up their equipment. She introduced herself as Coach Hendricks and asked if she could talk to me for a minute. I said yes, wondering if something was wrong. She told me that whatever had changed at home was clearly helping Ariana's performance. She said Ariana had been distracted and unfocused for weeks, but in the last few games she'd been a completely different player. More engaged, more confident, a better teammate. I thanked her and told her we'd been working through some family stuff. She nodded and said it showed in the best way possible. Watching Ariana walk off the court with her teammates, laughing about something one of them said, made something loosen in my chest. The following week, Ariana brought a girl home from volleyball practice. She walked through the front door and called out that she had a friend with her. I came out of my bedroom where I'd been folding laundry and met them in the living room. The girl was tall with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She smiled at me and stuck out her hand. She introduced herself as Larissa Pritchard and thanked me for letting her come over. I liked her immediately. She made eye contact. She had good posture. She seemed comfortable but respectful. The girls went to Ariana's room to work on homework together, and I heard them talking about their math assignment instead of gossiping about other kids. An hour later, a car pulled up outside and Larissa's mother came to the door to pick her up. She introduced herself as Theo Pritchard, and we talked for a few minutes in the doorway. She seemed warm and grounded. She mentioned that Larissa had been talking about Ariana all week and was glad the girls had become friends. We exchanged phone numbers before she left. After they drove away, Ariana came into the kitchen where I was starting dinner. She asked what I thought of Larissa. I told her I thought she seemed like a really good person. Ariana smiled and said Larissa was different from her other friends, that she actually cared about school and had goals, that she made Ariana want to be better. I told Ariana I was proud of her for choosing healthier friendships. She hugged me quickly before going back to her room. 3 months passed. The school counselor called me at work on a Thursday afternoon. I stepped outside to take the call, worried something was wrong. Instead, she told me she was calling to congratulate both of us. Ariana's grades had improved significantly across all her subjects. She'd gone from mostly C's and D's to A's and B's. Her teachers reported that she was participating more in class and turning in all her assignments on time. The counselor said this kind of turnaround was unusual, and she wanted to acknowledge the hard work both Ariana and I had put in. Then she told me something else. Ariana had made the varsity volleyball team as a freshman. That almost never happened at their school. The coach had been so impressed with Ariana's improvement and dedication that she'd moved her up from junior varsity. I thanked the counselor and hung up. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going back inside to finish my shift. When I got home that night, Ariana was in the kitchen making herself a snack. I told her the counselor had called. She froze with the peanut butter jar in her hand. I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions before I smiled and told her I was so incredibly proud of her. She set down the jar and hugged me hard. She said she'd been scared to tell me about varsity because she didn't want to disappoint me if she couldn't keep up. I told her she could keep up, that I believed in her completely. The next weekend, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I took 2 days off from work. No double shifts, no extra hours, just a regular weekend at home with my daughter. On Saturday morning, we slept in until 9 o'clock. Then we got dressed and went to the mall. We tried on clothes in stores we usually just walked past because everything was too expensive. We didn't buy much, just a few things on clearance, but it felt good to browse without watching the clock. We had lunch at the food court, and Ariana told me about her classes and her friends and the boy in her English class who kept trying to talk to her. After lunch, we went to Target and bought snacks and a new lamp for Ariana's room because her old one had stopped working. We got home around 4 and changed into comfortable clothes. Ariana picked out 3 movies from our streaming queue and we made popcorn. We spent the evening on the couch watching movies and making fun of the bad dialogue. We didn't talk about anything heavy. We didn't process our feelings or have deep conversations. We just existed together in our living room, being normal, being peaceful. Around midnight, Ariana fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I sat there for a while longer, not wanting to move and wake her up. This was what I'd been working toward. Not grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. Just regular Saturday nights where my daughter felt safe enough to fall asleep next to me. On Monday evening, Ariana came to me while I was paying bills at the kitchen table. She stood in the doorway for a minute before asking if she could talk to me about something. I closed my laptop and told her to sit down. She sat across from me and picked at her fingernails. Then she asked if we could afford family therapy together. She said her school counselor had suggested it might help us build even better communication. She said she knew money was tight and therapy was expensive, but she thought it might be worth it. I stared at her for a second. My 14-year-old daughter was asking for therapy, was taking initiative to improve our relationship even though things were already so much better. I told her yes, that we could make it work, that I thought it was a great idea. She looked relieved. I spent the next 2 days calling different therapists and clinics. Most of them were way outside our budget, but I finally found a sliding scale clinic across town that charged based on income. I made an appointment for the following week. When I told Ariana, she thanked me 3 times. She seemed nervous but excited. I was nervous too. But if my daughter was brave enough to ask for help, I was brave enough to follow through. Our first therapy session was on a Tuesday evening. The clinic was in an older building with worn carpet and fluorescent lights. The therapist met us in the waiting room. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s, with glasses and a friendly smile. She led us back to her office and we sat on a couch while she took a chair across from us. The session started awkwardly. Neither of us knew what to say. The therapist asked us why we were there and what we hoped to get out of therapy. I let Ariana answer first. She talked about wanting better communication, about not wanting to fall back into old patterns. about being scared that we'd fought so hard to fix things and might mess it up again. Then I talked about wanting to give Ariana the tools to express her feelings without fear, about learning how to listen better, about making sure she always felt heard. The therapist listened to both of us and then started teaching us some basic communication techniques. She had us practice expressing feelings without blame, using phrases that started with how we felt instead of accusations about what the other person did. It felt weird at first, mechanical, but by the end of the session, both of us were getting better at it. Before we left, the therapist suggested monthly sessions to maintain the progress we'd made. We both agreed. Walking out to the car, Ariana said that wasn't as bad as she thought it would be. I agreed. It actually felt good to have someone neutral helping us navigate our relationship. Our second therapy session happened 3 weeks later. The therapist started by asking how things had been going at home. We both said things were good. Then she asked if there was anything specific we wanted to work on, and I took a deep breath and admitted something I'd never said out loud before. I told her that working constant double shifts had been partly about avoiding difficult conversations at home, that it was easier to be at work than to face the tension between Ariana and me, that I'd used exhaustion as an excuse not to deal with our problems. Ariana looked at me with surprise. Then she admitted something too. She said she'd pushed me away because it felt safer than risking more abandonment, that if she kept me at a distance, it would hurt less when I eventually left like her father did. She said she'd been testing me, seeing how far she could push before I'd give up on her. Hearing her say that broke something open in my chest. I reached over and took her hand. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, that she could test me for the rest of her life and I'd still be there. The therapist helped us talk through these admissions. She pointed out that we'd both been protecting ourselves in ways that actually made things worse. That real safety came from vulnerability, not distance. By the end of the session, we were both crying a little. But it felt like good crying, like releasing something we'd been carrying too long. Ariana's volleyball team made it to regional championships in late spring. The tournament was spread across 3 weekends with games every Saturday and Sunday. I arranged my work schedule to attend every single game. I switched shifts with coworkers. I called in favors. I made it work. Watching Ariana play in those championship games reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep our family together. She was thriving. She moved across the court with confidence and joy. She high-fived her teammates. She called out encouragement. She played like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Her team won their first 2 games easily. The third game was closer, but they pulled it out in the final set. The fourth game went to 5 sets and came down to the last few points. I sat in the bleachers with my hands clenched, barely breathing. When Ariana's teammate scored the winning point, the whole team rushed the court screaming and hugging each other. I stood up and clapped until my hands hurt. After the game, Ariana found me in the crowd. Her face was flushed and sweaty, and she was smiling so wide. She told me they were going to the championship finals, that they actually had a chance to win the whole thing. I hugged her and told her I was so proud, that I'd be at every game no matter what. The championship game was the following Saturday. The gym was packed with people from both schools. I got there an hour early to make sure I got a good seat. I ended up in the 3rd row right behind Ariana's team bench. The game started and both teams played hard. The score stayed close through the first 2 sets, each team winning 1. The 3rd set was tied at 23 when Ariana went back to serve. She bounced the ball a few times and looked up into the stands. Our eyes met and she waved at me. Just a small wave, barely lifting her hand. But it meant everything. She served and the ball cleared the net. The other team returned it, but Ariana's teammate spiked it down for a point. Ariana served again. Another point. And again. Her team pulled ahead and won the set. They won the 4th set too. When the final point was scored and the game was over, Ariana's team exploded with excitement. They jumped and screamed and hugged each other in a big pile in the middle of the court. Parents rushed down from the bleachers. I made my way through the crowd toward the team. Ariana spotted me and broke away from her teammates. She ran across the court and threw her arms around me. I held her tight while she cried happy tears into my shoulder. She kept saying they won. They actually won. I told her I knew they would, that I never doubted her for a second. Standing there in that gym with my daughter in my arms, I cried too. These were the moments I'd been working toward. Not the big dramatic reconciliations or the therapy breakthroughs, just my daughter running to hug me first when something good happened in her life. 6 months had passed since the night I picked Ariana up from that party. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner when she brought up her father. She asked if I thought she should try reaching out to him one more time. She said she knew he'd probably disappoint her again, but she wanted to try. She wanted to know she'd done everything she could before giving up completely. I asked her what she wanted to say to him. She said she wanted to tell him how his abandonment had affected her. She wanted to ask if he'd be willing to have any kind of relationship with her at all, even just occasional phone calls or emails. I told her I supported whatever decision she made, that she had every right to reach out if that's what she needed, but I warned her to protect her heart, to prepare herself for the possibility that he wouldn't respond or that his response would be hurtful. She nodded and said she understood. She asked if I'd help her write the email. I said yes. We spent the next hour at the kitchen table working on it together. She wrote about her feelings and her life and her accomplishments. She asked honest questions about why he'd left and whether he ever thought about her. The email was careful and measured. It didn't blame or accuse. It just asked for the truth and the possibility of connection. When it was finished, she showed it to me one more time. I told her it was perfect. She took a deep breath and hit send. 2 weeks crawled by without any response from her father. I checked my email constantly during those first few days, watching Ariana's face fall each time she opened her laptop. She never said anything about checking her inbox, but I could tell from the way she stared at the screen and then closed it quickly. On day 10, she found me folding laundry in the living room and sat down on the couch next to me. She picked up a towel and started folding it without looking at me. She said she wasn't surprised he hadn't answered. She said she needed to try one last time so she'd never spend her life wondering what if. Her voice was steady and calm, more mature than I'd heard from her before. I told her I was proud of how she handled it. She smiled a little and kept folding towels. On day 16, her father finally responded. Ariana was at volleyball practice when the email came through. I saw the notification on my phone because she'd forwarded me a copy of her original email, and his response showed up in the same thread. I didn't open it. I waited for her to come home and discover it herself. She walked in the door at 6:30, dropped her gym bag in the hallway, and headed straight for her laptop on the kitchen table. I was making dinner and I heard her breath catch. She read it once, then twice, then looked up at me with tears already streaming down her face. She turned the laptop toward me. The email was 4 sentences long. He said he'd moved on with his wife and built a new family. He said looking backward wasn't healthy for anyone involved. He said he wished her well, but thought it was best if they didn't have contact. He signed it with just his first name. Ariana cried in my arms for 20 minutes. Her whole body shook and I just held her, rubbing circles on her back the way I did when she was little. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes and said at least now she had closure. She said she was glad to know for sure instead of always wondering. She opened her laptop again, deleted his contact information from her email and her phone, and closed the computer. She seemed lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. We ate dinner together that night and talked about her volleyball practice instead of her father. She laughed at something her teammate had said during drills. The conversation felt normal and easy in a way it hadn't in years. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small changes in how Ariana talked to me. She called me mom more often instead of just starting sentences without any greeting. When Larissa came over to study one afternoon, Ariana introduced me as her mom with this tone of genuine pride instead of the teenage embarrassment I'd gotten used to. She told Larissa that I worked really hard to take care of both of us. Larissa smiled at me and said her own mom had mentioned how impressive it was that I managed everything on my own. These tiny shifts meant everything to me. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. They showed me that Ariana finally understood what I'd been trying to tell her for years. My birthday fell on a Tuesday in late October. I wasn't expecting anything special because I had to work and Ariana had school. I came home that evening to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a wrapped box in front of her. She had this nervous excitement on her face like she couldn't wait for me to open it. I set down my purse and sat across from her. She pushed the box toward me and told me to open it. Inside was a framed photo of us at her volleyball championship game. We were both smiling huge smiles and her arm was around my shoulders. The frame had an inscription at the bottom that read, "To the parent who stayed, I love you, Mom." I started crying before I even finished reading it. Ariana told me she'd used money from babysitting to buy it. She said she wanted me to have something that showed how much she appreciated everything I did. I hugged her so tight and thanked her about 10 times. She laughed and said I was welcome and happy birthday. I hung the photo in our kitchen the next morning, right on the wall where we could both see it from the table. Every single time I walked past it or sat down for a meal, I looked at that picture and felt this wave of gratitude. It reminded me that being present mattered more than being perfect. It reminded me that all those double shifts and sacrifices had been worth it. It reminded me that Ariana finally saw me clearly, not through the lens of her father's abandonment or Mia's mother's gossip, but as the person who chose her every single day. A few weeks later, Ariana started asking me questions about my life that had nothing to do with being her mother. We were driving home from her volleyball practice one evening when she asked what I wanted to be when I was her age. I told her I'd wanted to be a teacher. She asked why I didn't become one. I explained that I got pregnant with her right after high school and had to start working immediately to support us. She was quiet for a minute, then asked if I ever regretted not going to college. I told her honestly that I wished I'd had the chance, but I didn't regret her. She nodded and said, maybe I could still go someday. The conversation felt different from our usual talks. She was seeing me as a whole person with dreams and interests beyond just taking care of her. These conversations continued over the following months. I shared stories about my own teenage years and the mistakes I made. I told her about the time I snuck out to a party and got caught and how scared I was when my mother grounded me for a month. I told her about the boy I dated who treated me badly and how I wished someone had helped me see the red flags earlier. Ariana listened carefully to every story. She started understanding that I wasn't trying to control her or ruin her fun. I was trying to protect her from painful lessons I'd learned the hard way. She told me one night that my stories helped her make better choices because she could see where certain paths led. 9 months after our reconciliation, Ariana brought home her report card and showed it to me with this proud smile. She'd made honor roll for the first time in 2 years. Every single grade was a B or higher. She told me that our improved home life had helped her focus on the school, instead of being angry and confused all the time. She said it was easier to care about homework when she wasn't fighting with me every day. I told her how proud I was, and suggested we celebrate with dinner at her favorite restaurant. We went that weekend and she talked the whole time about her classes and her teachers and her plans for next semester. Watching her be excited about school again felt like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. The following week, Theo invited us to a family barbecue at her house. She said several other volleyball parents would be there, and she thought it would be nice for everyone to get to know each other outside of games. I said yes immediately. We showed up on Saturday afternoon with a pasta salad I'd made that morning. Theo's backyard was full of people and music and kids running around. She introduced me to other parents and we stood around talking while our daughters played volleyball in the grass. Having a social network of supportive adults felt new and wonderful after years of isolation. These were people who understood the challenges of raising teenagers and balancing work and parenting. They invited me to join a group text where they shared carpooling schedules and game updates. For the first time in forever, I felt like I had a community. I noticed something had changed in me around this time. Ariana pointed it out one morning when I was getting ready for work. She said I looked different, lighter somehow, even though I was still putting in long hours at my job. I laughed and told her I felt the same as always, but she shook her head and insisted something was different about my face, the way I moved through the house. She was right, though I hadn't realized it until she said it out loud. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the constant worry and hurt from our fighting, had lifted. Working double shifts was hard on my body, but that emotional burden had been so much heavier. Without it pressing down on me every single day, I could breathe easier. I smiled more. I stood straighter. The physical exhaustion from work was nothing compared to the exhaustion of wondering if my daughter hated me. Our therapy sessions continued through the summer. One afternoon in late August, our counselor sat back in her chair and looked at both of us with this satisfied expression. She said we'd come incredibly far in the past year, and she was proud of the work we'd both done. Then she suggested we might be ready to reduce our sessions to just quarterly check-ins, maybe every 3 months instead of every week. I felt a flash of panic at first, worried we'd lose the progress we'd made without that weekly support. But Ariana reached over and squeezed my hand, and we talked it through right there in the session. We agreed to the reduced schedule but promised each other we'd keep having honest conversations at home, the kind we'd learned to have in therapy. The counselor reminded us that the tools we'd developed were ours to keep, and we could always come back if we needed more support. Walking out of that session felt like graduating from something important. The following fall, Ariana started high school. I was nervous about the transition, remembering how rough middle school had been for both of us. But she walked into that building on the first day with her head up and her shoulders back, completely different from the angry, confused girl she'd been a year earlier. She'd chosen her friends carefully over the summer, sticking close to Larissa and a few other girls from volleyball who seemed grounded and kind. She signed up for activities that actually interested her instead of whatever Mia had been doing. And every single day she came home to me. She'd walk through the door, drop her backpack and tell me about her classes or her teachers or something funny that happened at lunch. She trusted me again, and I could see it in everything she did. My supervisor called me into her office one Tuesday morning in October. I thought I was in trouble for something, maybe taking too many shifts or not enough, but she told me to sit down and then offered me a promotion. The position came with better hours, which meant I wouldn't have to work as many double shifts anymore and slightly higher pay that would help us build our savings back up. I accepted immediately, almost crying right there in her office. When I got home that evening, Ariana had cooked dinner. She'd made spaghetti and garlic bread. Nothing fancy, but she'd done it all herself while I was at work. She'd even set the table with real plates instead of paper ones. She said she wanted to celebrate my promotion, that she was proud of me. We ate together and talked about what the extra money might mean for us. Maybe a real vacation someday, or new equipment for volleyball. It was one of those perfect ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because of everything we'd been through to get there. A few weeks later, Ariana came into the living room where I was folding laundry and sat down next to me. She started asking questions about dating and boys, but not in the defiant way she used to ask about things. She was genuinely curious, wanting my perspective on relationships and what to look for in someone who treated you right. I put down the towel I was folding and we talked for almost an hour about respect and red flags and how to know when someone truly cares about you. I told her about her father, the warning signs I'd missed when we first got together, the ways he'd made me feel small that I'd ignored because I was young and didn't know better. She listened to every word, asked thoughtful questions, and actually seemed to value what I had to say. This was the conversation I'd wanted to have with her for years, and it was finally happening because we'd built enough trust for her to let me in. Her first high school dance was in November. She came into my room the night of the dance wearing a dark blue dress that hit just above her knees. She did a little spin and asked what I thought. I told her she looked beautiful, absolutely stunning, and I meant every word. Then I asked if she was sure the dress met the school's dress code requirements, and instead of getting mad at me for checking, she laughed and showed me the school handbook guidelines she'd already reviewed. We took pictures in the living room, just the two of us, and I drove her to the school. She kissed my cheek before getting out of the car and told me she'd text me when she was ready to be picked up. I watched her walk into the building with her friends, and my heart felt so full it hurt. She texted me at exactly 10:30, right when the dance ended. I pulled up to the school and she climbed into the car, talking before she even closed the door. She spent the entire drive home telling me about the music and the decorations and the photo booth where she and her friends took silly pictures. Then she mentioned a boy named Justin who'd asked her to dance, and her whole face lit up when she described how nervous he'd been. She said they'd danced to 3 songs, and he'd asked for her number at the end of the night. The easy way she shared this with me, trusting me with something that mattered to her, felt like the most precious gift she could have given me. We got home and she kept talking while we made hot chocolate, and I just listened and smiled, so grateful for this moment of connection. The next weekend, Ariana asked if she could sleep over at Larissa's house. It was the first time she'd asked about a sleepover since the crisis that had brought us back together. I felt my stomach tighten for just a second, old fears trying to surface. But then I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I saw someone completely different from the girl who'd gone to that party a year ago. I knew Larissa well by now, had spent time with her and Theo at volleyball events and team dinners. I trusted both girls, and more importantly, I trusted Ariana's judgment. I said yes without hesitation. She hugged me and ran off to pack her overnight bag, and I realized I wasn't scared anymore. While Ariana was at Larissa's that night, I sat in our quiet house and waited for the anxiety to hit. I kept expecting to feel worried or restless, to check my phone every 5 minutes or imagine worst-case scenarios. But none of that happened. I made myself dinner, watched a movie, went to bed at a reasonable hour. I trusted my daughter completely, trusted that she knew how to make good choices and that she'd call me if she needed anything. The peace I felt was so different from the fear that used to consume me whenever she left the house. We'd built something real together, a foundation strong enough that I didn't have to worry anymore. A year after our kitchen table reconciliation, Ariana came home from the school with this excited look on her face. She told me she'd written an essay for her English class about the parent who shaped her most. A few days later, her teacher called me at work. The teacher said she'd been teaching for 20 years, and Ariana's essay was the most moving piece she'd ever read. She asked if she could read it aloud to her other classes as an example of powerful personal writing. I gave permission, my voice shaking, and when I got home that evening, Ariana showed me the essay. I sat at our kitchen table and read about our 7-day separation, about the scary party, and the moment she realized her father had truly abandoned her, about learning that love means showing up every single day instead of making grand gestures. I cried reading every word, and when I finished, I pulled my daughter into my arms and held her tight. We talked about getting the essay printed at the copy shop downtown and picking out a frame that matched the one around her championship photo. The next afternoon, Ariana drove us to the store, and we spent 20 minutes looking at different frames until we found one with the same dark wood finish. Back home, she helped me measure the wall space and mark where the nail should go. I held the frame against the wall while she checked if it was level, and when we finally hung it up, we both stepped back to look at our work. The championship photo showed Ariana mid-jump at the net, her team celebrating behind her, and the essay sat right beside it telling a different kind of victory story. Our kitchen wall now held 2 frames that captured who we'd become together, not just as mother and daughter, but as 2 people who'd learned how to be honest with each other. I ran my fingers along the edge of the essay frame and felt something settle in my chest, a quiet pride that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with survival. 3 weeks later, Ariana came home from volleyball practice with news that her coach had nominated her for a leadership award. The ceremony would be at the school gym in front of all the teams and their families, and winners would give short acceptance speeches. Ariana practiced her speech at our kitchen table, reading it to me twice and asking if certain parts sounded okay. The night of the ceremony, I sat in the bleachers watching other students accept awards for academics and athletics, and then they called Ariana's name. She walked up to the microphone looking nervous but steady, accepted her trophy from the coach, and then turned to face the crowd. She thanked her teammates and her coach, talked about what leadership meant to her, and then she looked right at me in the stands. Her voice got quieter but stronger somehow, and she said that her mom had taught her what real strength looked like by working double shifts and showing up to every game and never giving up even when things got hard. People started clapping before she even finished, and I had to wipe my eyes because I wasn't expecting her to say any of that. When the ceremony ended, Ariana found me in the parking lot and I hugged her, so tight I thought I might never let go. 15 months had passed since the week I'd left, since the scary party and the kitchen table conversation that changed everything. I was at the grocery store comparing prices on pasta when I heard someone say my name. I turned around and there was Mia's mother standing by her cart, looking uncomfortable. She said she'd been wanting to talk to me for a while, that she owed me an apology for the things she'd said about my divorce and my parenting. She admitted she'd spread gossip without knowing the real story, and she was sorry for any pain she'd caused. I stood there holding my box of pasta and looking at this woman who'd made my life harder during an already impossible time. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly how much damage her words had done, how Ariana had thrown those rumors in my face during our worst fight. But I was tired of anger and blame, tired of carrying around resentment that only hurt me. I told her I accepted her apology, and I hoped she'd learned something about minding her own business. Then I pushed my cart past her and finished my shopping, and I felt lighter somehow, knowing I didn't have to hold on to that bitterness anymore. Our personal life wasn't her concern then, and it wasn't her concern now, and I'd made my peace with that boundary. A few days later, Ariana told me she'd run into Mia at the school near the lockers. They'd talked for a few minutes, just normal conversation about classes and teachers, nothing deep or emotional. Ariana said it wasn't weird exactly, just different from how their friendship used to be. That evening while we were doing dishes together, Ariana brought it up again and said she was grateful she'd chosen different friends after everything that happened. She'd learned that real friends don't encourage you to sneak out to parties or lie to your parents or make dangerous choices. Real friends care about your safety and your future, not just having fun in the moment. I handed her a plate to dry and told her I was proud of how she'd learned that lesson, even though it came from a scary experience. She nodded and said she wouldn't trade Larissa and her other volleyball friends for anything, that they'd shown her what real friendship looked like. As Ariana's 16th birthday approached, we sat down together to talk about new freedoms and responsibilities. She wanted a later curfew now that she was getting older, and I understood that was reasonable. We agreed on 11 o'clock on weekends instead of 10, but only if she maintained her grades at B or above. She also wanted to start driving once she got her license, which meant we needed to talk about car insurance costs. I showed her the numbers and explained I couldn't afford the full increase on my salary alone. Ariana said she'd get a part-time job on weekends to help pay for it, maybe at the coffee shop near school or babysitting for neighbors. I told her I'd match whatever she contributed, and we shook hands on the deal like we were business partners. Setting these boundaries together instead of me just laying down rules felt like progress, like we were building something based on mutual respect instead of control and rebellion. The following Saturday morning, Ariana and I drove to an empty parking lot behind the closed shopping center. She had her permit now and needed practice before her driving test. I handed her the keys and she adjusted the seat and mirrors exactly like the instructor had taught her. She started the car carefully, checked all around for obstacles even though the lot was completely empty, and then slowly pressed the gas pedal. We spent an hour driving circles around the parking lot, practicing turns and parking between the faded lines. Ariana was nervous but focused, asking questions about blind spots and following distance. She never got frustrated when I corrected her, just listened and tried again. By the end of the session, she was parking smoothly and making clean turns, and I realized I actually trusted her behind the wheel. We made it a Sunday morning tradition after that, meeting in the same parking lot to practice until she felt ready for her test. 2 years had passed since our kitchen table reconciliation, since the night I'd picked her up from that party, and we'd finally told each other the truth. Ariana suggested we return to that same spot and make it a tradition to check in honestly with each other every year on this date. We sat down after dinner with cups of tea, the framed essay hanging on the wall behind us like a reminder of how far we'd come. The kitchen looked the same, but everything felt different, calmer somehow. Ariana said she wanted us to always have this space to talk about hard things, to make sure we never fell back into the pattern of avoiding difficult conversations. I agreed and told her I thought it was a smart idea, that having a scheduled time to be vulnerable with each other would keep us connected even when life got busy. During our check-in, Ariana told me something I hadn't expected. She said she was grateful I'd left that week, even though it had been scary and painful at the time. It forced both of us to face hard truths we'd been avoiding, made her realize how much she needed me, and made me realize I couldn't protect her by hiding from difficult conversations. She said the week apart had been necessary somehow, like breaking a bone that had healed wrong, so it could heal right the second time. I took a sip of my tea and thought about that, about how sometimes you have to fall apart before you can build something stronger. I told her I was grateful she'd called me from that party, That hearing the fear in her voice had reminded me what really mattered. Not being right or protecting my pride or avoiding pain, just being there for my daughter when she needed me most. We sat quietly for a minute, both of us thinking about how close we'd come to losing each other completely. Then Ariana asked me a question that made my breath catch. She wanted to know if I ever regretted having her so young, if I resented all the sacrifices I'd made. I looked at my daughter across the table, this smart and strong 16-year-old who'd grown into someone I genuinely liked spending time with. I told her the truth, that motherhood was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and there were plenty of nights I'd cried from exhaustion and worry, but she'd never been a burden, not once in 16 years. She'd always been my reason to keep going, my reason to work those double shifts and fight to keep our house and show up to every volleyball game. Having her young meant I'd missed out on some things, sure, but I'd gained something more valuable than any experience I'd given up. I'd gained her, and I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. Ariana brought up her father one afternoon while we folded laundry together in the living room. She said his name without the usual tension in her voice, just matter of fact, like she was talking about someone she used to know a long time ago. She told me she'd been thinking about him differently lately, understanding that his choice to leave wasn't about her being unlovable or me being impossible. It was about his own limits, his inability to handle responsibility or stay when things got hard. She said she'd made peace with it because she finally saw that his absence said everything about him and nothing about her worth. I stopped folding the towel in my hands and looked at her, this almost grown daughter who'd figured out something that took me years to understand. She smiled a little and said she was grateful for the therapy sessions, for learning how to talk about hard things without letting them control her life. Then she mentioned something that caught me completely off guard. She wanted to study psychology in college. She said watching how our family therapy had transformed our relationship showed her how powerful honest communication could be, how much healing was possible when people learned to really talk to each other. She wanted to help other families find that same kind of breakthrough, especially kids dealing with absent parents or complicated family situations. I felt this surge of pride that made my chest tight because she was taking our worst moments and turning them into something meaningful. She was choosing to build her future on the foundation of what we'd survived together. Ariana's 16th birthday arrived on a Saturday in late spring. I took an extra shift the week before to afford the party she deserved, renting space at the community center where her volleyball team practiced. I invited her teammates, her close friends from the school, and a few of the parents I'd gotten to know through games and tournaments. Larissa helped me decorate with streamers and balloons in Ariana's favorite colors, while Theo set up a playlist of music I'd carefully screened to make sure it was appropriate. Ariana walked in wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, something between little girl and young woman, and her face lit up when she saw all the people who'd shown up for her. I stood back and watched her move through the room, hugging her friends, laughing at jokes, posing for photos with her teammates. This was what I'd worked for all those double shifts and sleepless nights. Not the party itself, but the joy on her face, the confidence in how she carried herself, the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. She caught my eye from across the room and mouthed, "Thank you," and I had to blink back tears because this moment felt like proof that we'd made it through the worst and come out stronger. Halfway through the party, Larissa tapped a spoon against a cup to get everyone's attention. Ariana stood up looking nervous, and I realized she was about to make a speech. She cleared her throat and thanked everyone for coming. Then she turned to look directly at me. She said she wanted everyone to know that I wasn't just her mother, but her hero, the person who taught her what real love looked like through actions instead of words. She told them I'd worked double shifts to keep a roof over our heads, showed up to every volleyball game no matter how tired I was, and never gave up on her even when she pushed me away. Her voice got thick with emotion when she said I wasn't the reason her father left. I was the reason she was thriving, the reason she had a home and opportunities and people who cared about her. She said everything good in her life came from my refusal to quit on us. The room went quiet, except for a few sniffles from other parents, and I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Ariana walked over and hugged me tight while everyone clapped, and I whispered in her ear that she made every sacrifice worth it. She whispered back that she knew, that she finally understood everything I'd done for her. The next morning, we tackled the cleanup together. Bags of trash and leftover decorations scattered across the kitchen. We worked without talking much, just comfortable silence broken by occasional laughter when we remembered something funny from the party. Ariana teased me about how I'd danced to one of her favorite songs, and I reminded her that she'd promised never to show anyone the video Larissa took. We moved around each other easily, handing each other trash bags and wiping down surfaces with the kind of teamwork that comes from really knowing someone. I realized this was what partnership felt like, this natural rhythm of working together toward the same goal. Not the dramatic declarations or big gestures, but the quiet morning after, cleaning up together and finding joy in the small moments. Ariana loaded the dishwasher while I swept the floor, and when we finished, she made us both hot chocolate even though it was almost summer. We sat at the kitchen table with our mugs, exhausted but happy, and I thought about how far we'd traveled from that terrible week 2 years ago, when everything fell apart. 3 weeks later, Ariana passed her driver's test on the first try. She came running out of the DMV waving her new license in the air, and I hugged her so tight she laughed and told me to breathe. On the drive home, she asked if she could take us to her volleyball practice that afternoon, and I handed her the keys without hesitation. She adjusted the mirrors carefully, checked her blind spots twice, and pulled out of the parking lot with steady hands. I watched her drive with this mix of pride and terror that probably every parent feels when their kid gets behind the wheel. But she was careful and confident, following the speed limit and using her turn signals and keeping both hands on the wheel like I'd taught her. When we pulled into the gym parking lot, she looked over at me with this huge grin and asked how she did. I told her she drove better than half the adults I knew, and I meant it. Watching her walk into practice carrying her gym bag, so grown up and capable, I felt this shift inside me. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was becoming someone I genuinely respected and admired. We still thought about normal things like we always had. Her room stayed messy no matter how many times I asked her to clean it. She pushed back on screen time limits and tried to negotiate later curfews. She procrastinated on homework until the last possible minute, and then stressed about deadlines she could have easily met. But something fundamental had changed in how we handled these conflicts. They didn't spiral into days of cold silence or hurtful words we couldn't take back. We argued, made our points, sometimes raised our voices, and then we moved on. The foundation underneath was solid enough that these surface disagreements couldn't shake it. We both knew we loved each other, knew we were on the same team even when we disagreed about the rules. Our fights resolved in hours instead of weeks, because we'd learned how to separate the small stuff from what really mattered. And what really mattered was always the same thing. We had each other's backs no matter what. Every single time Ariana left the house, she paused at the door to say those 3 words. It didn't matter if she was annoyed with me about something I'd said or a rule I'd enforced. It didn't matter if we just finished arguing about her messy room or her phone use. She'd grab her backpack or her gym bag, reach for the doorknob, then turn back and say it. Love you, Mom. Sometimes she said it cheerfully, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes with an eye roll attached. But she always said it. And I always smiled because those words meant more than any apology or explanation ever could. They meant she knew I'd be there when she came back. They meant she trusted our foundation enough to leave knowing it would still be solid when she returned. They meant she'd finally learned the difference between a parent who made promises and a parent who kept them. 2 years had passed since that terrible week when I'd driven to my sister's house and left Ariana to figure things out on her own. 2 years since she'd called me crying from that party, scared and alone, learning the hard way that her father had moved on without her. Looking back now, I could see how that week had cracked us both open in ways that needed to happen. The protective lies I'd been telling had to shatter before we could build something real. The anger she'd been carrying had to break before she could let herself love me without reservation. We'd built something stronger than before, something based on honesty and respect, and the daily choice to show up for each other. Not just during the big moments, but during all the small, ordinary ones that actually made up a life. Making breakfast together on Sunday mornings, driving to volleyball practice, folding laundry while talking about college plans. These were the moments that proved love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about consistency, about being present even when it was hard or boring or inconvenient. I stood in our kitchen looking at the framed photo from her volleyball championship and the essay she'd written about me for English class. Both hung on the wall where we'd had our breakthrough conversation that night 2 years ago. The photo showed Ariana mid-serve, focused and powerful, and completely in her element. The essay described her journey from angry teenager to someone who understood that love meant showing up, not just saying the words. I read the last line again even though I'd memorized it months ago. My father gave me life, but my mother gave me a home. And that made all the difference. I used to think her father's absence was my failure somehow, that if I'd been better or different or more, he would have stayed. But standing here looking at everything we'd built together, I finally understood what Ariana had figured out before I did. He gave her life. I gave her everything else. And she understood the difference now, really understood it in a way that went deeper than words. So did I. Well, that wraps up whatever this was. If you stayed until the end, I assume curiosity got the best of you. Might as well come back next time and see if I top it.